It's no secret that my favorite class of ships is the tribal class destroyers of both the Royal Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, where it was the first episode of the Fate Of series, and my favorite, with some bias, the Royal Canadian Navy. So, in the third edition of Fate Of, I will go over the fates of all three HMCS Athabaskans, two of which are tribals, and the third is unofficially nicknamed a tribal. So, coming in at number 3. My favorite Athabaskan, and one of my favorite ships. HMCS Athabaskan G07. Motto, we fight as one. Athabaskan was built by Vickers Armstrong in Newcastle upon Tyne. She was ordered on April 5, 1940, laid down on October 31st, 1940, launched on November 15, 1941, and commissioned on February 3, 1943. She would receive the following battle honors: Arctic 1943-44, and English Channel 1944. And it would be in the English Channel on April 19, 1944, where she was patrolling with her sister and my favorite ship, tied with the paddle wheel princess, HMCS Haida, in support of British mining operations off the coast of France. They were ordered to intercept German warships, which turned out to be 3 torpedo boats. Athabaskan was potentially hit by shore batteries, although that is a gray area. What is known for sure is a torpedo struck her on the port side in her stern. And about 50 minutes later, there was a potential second explosion, but no one's sure if that was another torpedo hit or if that was from the ammunition magazines. In another analysis, she may have also been the victim of friendly fire from HMS MTB 677, a British torpedo boat covering mining operations. In the end, she sunk. Her wreck is in a shattered condition on the seabed, as found in 2004, so it's unlikely we will ever really know. Haida proceeded to drop her own motor cutter, needing to leave due to the rising sun and an increased risk of air and sea attacks. Now, the motor cutter rescued 2 of Haida's own crew who fell overboard when the nets were dropped for survivors when Haida departed. They also rescued 6 from Athabaskan before making a long trip back to the UK. 44 were rescued by Haida herself, and 83 were taken as POWs by 3 German minesweepers, who arrived after Haida had left. 128 men, including her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander John Stubbs, who declined rescue by Haida to swim back to be with his remaining crew. Now, it was said when he was a few feet from Haida, he ordered his last known command, telling Haida to get out of here, E-boats. He could have easily been taken by Haida, but he refused to leave his men after ordering Haida to safety. Haida would later go on to destroy all 3 torpedo boats from that night, in multiple separate engagements, getting revenge for her fallen sister. Never mess with Haida. The fightingest ship in the Navy for a reason. In 2004, the Royal Canadian Navy provided a blast plaque to be laid on the wreck to commemorate her loss. Nothing from her is preserved except for one big part. Not from Athabaskan herself, but HMCS Haida, formerly in Toronto and now in Hamilton, carrying on the legacy of her fallen sister. Near Bella Bella, British Columbia, an island was named Athabaskan Island after her, and a school in the Belmont Park neighborhood of Collingwood, British Columbia, a suburb of Victoria, was named a Cole John Stubbs Memorial School after her commanding officer. Coming in at number 2, as the second Canadian Athabaskan, HMCS Athabaskan R79, and later DDE 219, nicknamed Athabaskan 2 and Athabee, although I like to call her Athabay. It's just my personal one. She was the second and final tribal class destroyer to bear the name, although of course the next is an unofficial tribal. She was not named after the First Nations who shared the Athabaskan language. She was named after her fallen sister, HMCS Athabaskan G07, also sharing her motto of "We Fight as One." Unlike her lost sister Haida and several other of the earlier Canadian tribals, she, along with her 3 youngest siblings, were built by the Halifax shipyards in Halifax, Nova Scotia, although Athabaskan herself was the last Canadian tribal built and the last to be commissioned of the global fleet of 27. She was laid down on May 15, 1943, launched on May 4, 1946, and commissioned on January 20, 1948. She was commissioned far too late to fight in World War II, but just in time for the Korean War, serving 3 tours. Before that, she had a mutiny of sorts in 1949, where 90 of her crew locked themselves in the mess deck, refusing to budge until the captain would hear their grievances. At the same time, similar incidents happened on both HMCS Crescent and the carrier HMCS Magnificent, who happens to be in the second episode of the Fate of series. It's a long story for another video, but to sum it up fairly quickly, all the captains avoided the word mutiny to avoid any potential legal issues for said crew, and the mutinies ended fairly quickly. Now, the first of her mini Korean War tours started on July 5th, 1950, and she returned from her third and final one on December 11th, 1953. For her various actions during the war, she would earn her one and only battle honor, Korea 1950-53. Following her return, she underwent a major refit, re-entering service on October 25th, 1954, now as a destroyer escort, DDE-219. In January 1959, she left for the East Coast to join the tribal-class squadron of her and her sisters. She was damaged in a collision with the last Canadian carrier, also in the previous Fate of episode, HMCS Bonaventure, Magnificent's younger sister, nicknamed Bonnie, in 1963. She was finally placed in reserve in 1964, formally decommissioned on April 21st, 1966, and sold for scrap in 1969, and finally scrapped in 1970 in Italy. Her bell is preserved at the Naval Museum of Halifax in Halifax, Nova Scotia. This ended her long service, but not the end of her name. Coming in at number 3 is the third and final of the 2026 HMCS Athabaskan number 3, and the final of a once mighty fleet of Canadian destroyers, till the first of the River class comes online sometime in the early 2030s, to continue on the legacy. She was the third ship of the class, but the second completed, beating her older sister Huron by 2.5 months. The final Athabaskan was built by Davies Shipbuilding in Liaison, Quebec, as an Iroquois-class destroyer, specifically member number 3. She was laid down on June 21st, 1969, the same year as the previous Athabaskan was sold for scrap. The same day as her Huron, her older sister, or supposedly older sister. I guess you could argue they're the same age. Although Huron was at Marine Industries in Sorel, Quebec. Athabaskan was launched on November 27th, 1970, commissioned on September 30th, 1972. Her motto was the same as the 2 Athabaskans before her: "We fight as one." She had a relatively interesting career, so here's a few of them. On November 26, 1971, the Sea King helicopter removed 44 people of the 62 people from the oil rig Rowan Juno, just off of Sable Island, as a drifting 576-foot Euro Princess was in danger of hitting it as she was drifting. She later grounded a mile from the oil rig as a tugboat was already on its way to assist and to stop it running into the oil rig. She underwent a refit in late August 1990 for Operation Friction, part of Operation Desert Shield. She would be sent to the Persian Gulf in late 1990 and undertook escort duties in January 1991. On February 18, 1991, USS Tripoli and USS Princeton both struck mines while conducting operations in the Persian Gulf, being led to safety by HMCS Athabaskan, who finally got to have a slightly more quiet career. Once during the Gulf War, she underwent a sea-to-sea refueling from, of all ships, the mighty Iowa-class fast battleship, USS Wisconsin, Temper herself. And that's one of my favorite facts about her. She underwent the Trump refit, the Tribal Refit and Update Modernization Program. Oftentimes, the Iroquois class was just known as the Tribal class. Not after Donald Trump, the current president and the 45th president of the United States. Now, this needs its own video as it's far too long to cover here, and as I would cover all four sisters as there were some differences in construction times for them. However, I do prefer the Earl class after the refit, just from a look standpoint. She was under this refit from October 1991 to August 1994. She would lose her first sister, Huron, when she was sunk in a live fire exercise off Vancouver Island on May 14, 2007, as the RCN didn't have the personnel for her. She had been decommissioned because of that in 2000, and was the most modern destroyer, having been the last to be completed in the Trump refit. So, they sunk her as an exercise. I personally maybe would have chosen one of the older ones, but I'm sure they had their reasons. Good or not, I'm sure they had them. She would lose her next sister, in fact the one she was built with, at Davies, HMCS Algonquin, when she was sold for scrap on November 27, 2015. Athabaskan would lose her last sister, the lead ship, Iroquois, built at Marine, like Huron, when she was sold for scrap on November 24, 2016, both Algonquin and Iroquois having been decommissioned in 2 separate months in 2015. Athabaskan would sail along alone for almost 2 years, when she was decommissioned on March 10, 2017. I just wish they waited until after Canada's 150th birthday celebrations on July 1st, 2017. I just think that would have been really cool if they could have had her participate in some way. Attempts were made to preserve her, but the government said no, wary as previous attempts with other ships had failed and became the government's problem. While her 2 scrap sisters were scrapped in Liverpool, Nova Scotia, Athabaskan herself, when sold for scrap in 2018, went to Sydney, Nova Scotia, ending not only her class, but the last of the Canadian destroyers, until the Type 26 frigates were classified as River-class destroyers only a few years ago, with the lead ship HMCS Fraser being expected to be commissioned in the early 2030s. When she was scrapped in 2018, it was the same year as the ship she helped all those 27 years ago, USS Tripoli, and USS Princeton still serves today. So, what's left of her? Well, just like Athabaskan number 2, I wish we had Athabaskan number 1's bell, but she has both her bells preserved at the Naval Museum of Halifax, and that's all that I know. So in a recap, 1 sunk and 2 scrapped. 3 bells from the final 2, all preserved at the same museum. Athabaskans have belonged in the Navy since World War II, and now we have none. I don't know that they're going to plan any more to be named Athabaskan, let alone destroyers. The River class are all going to be named after the previous River class of destroyers. And they do want up to 12 brand new submarines, so maybe we'll get some submarines named after some tribals. Or maybe the vessels that end up replacing the Kingston class, if they make any, will be named after tribals. You can hope. I would doubt it, but you can always hope. The Royal Canadian Navy may not have had an Athabaskan since 2017, but all 3, especially the very first HMCS Athabaskan, deserve to be remembered.